Raskin and Ranking Member Heiss, and thank you all for being here today. I know your agencies are on the front line in combating domestic terrorism, racism, and hate crimes, as well as providing critical support for our first responders. This role is critical, and we must ensure that we're empowering our federal agencies in their efforts to stop hate and to keep Americans safe. People who commit these crimes and hold such hate in their heart have absolutely no place in our society. We must stop and condemn these actions at every level. Mr. McGarity and Mr. Shivers, questions a little similar to the last ones. A few weeks ago, this subcommittee held a hearing on this issue, and we heard from our witnesses that there are many current shortfalls that exist in data collection for hate crimes and domestic terrorism. I was wondering if you might be able to elaborate on this topic from the agency perspective.
From the domestic terrorism perspective, we certainly, we don't have a domestic terrorism statute that, like a material support statute for terrorism. So when a prosecutor charges something, he or she's going to use other Title 18 U.S. Code violations, maybe possession of a weapon, some other commission of a crime, and 50% of our crimes, 50% of our subjects that are arrested are actually arrested on state, local charges in coordination with the Joint Terrorism Task Force. So right there, the narrative as far as some of the subjects, now these are open subjects under investigation by the FBI Joint Terrorism Task Forces, are arrested by state, local crime, or by other federal crimes that do not have the word terrorism in them. So right there, the narrative and the American public would not necessarily see that. What we do, we push out to all our Joint Terrorism Task Force through the executives updates on those type cases. Obviously, where we can, we like to use domestic terrorism in the press release with the Department of Justice, or in our comments if we're allowed to, at a point of the case in a charging document. We will do that. You've seen that more recently in a case in Baltimore with a U.S. Coast Guard lieutenant charged with a drug charge with possession of a weapon. And then in the detention hearing memo, it was referred to domestic terrorism. So that, I think, is part of the issue. We certainly come and brief the House Homeland Committee, and anytime we've been asked to come brief any of the committees, we come and we brief what the threat is. So we're constantly doing that to your staffers, as well as to different committees here on the Hill. What we also do is because really it's our state local partners who are most important, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, the major cities sheriffs. I've been in front of both those committees briefing on domestic terrorism.
Thank you. Mr. Shivers, do you have anything?
Just to further address some of the issues and the discrepancies in relation to the Charlottesville case, that case was actually prosecuted as a hate crime. And also, I would like to draw a distinction between a hate incident and a hate crime. Obviously, if someone yells a racial slur at someone, they're protected by the First Amendment. And what happens is, in many instances, those incidents may be thought of by the victim to be a hate crime when it's more of a hate incident. A hate crime occurs if you have that similar incident, but it evolves into a criminal act directed at a victim based on his or her protected characteristics. And so when we talk about statistics, one has to make that distinction between a hate crime and a hate incident.
That's good. What changes would you make to improve the data collection?
Well, again, I believe that the transition to NIBRS will give greater clarity because, again, in the case that was cited earlier, it was the homicide and not the hate crime that was captured. Under NIBRS, you will have the ability to capture a number of criminal acts pertaining to one specific arrest. So if there is an assault, if there is a hate crime or some other crime that's committed, all those crimes would now be captured in NIBRS, where historically, with the hierarchy rule, only the most egregious crime was captured. So we are in the process of continuing to roll out NIBRS. The rollout has been underway since 2015, but some of the challenges are providing our state and local partners with the hardware and the software where they need to map their criminal violations to NIBRS, and then also go through the training and become certified. So again, we anticipate NIBRS completely being rolled out by 2021, but it's an ongoing process, and there are roughly 45% of the law enforcement agencies that report to the UCR have all transitioned to NIBRS.
Okay, one other quick question. Mr. McGarity, how have you seen domestic terrorism and its threat to the country evolve over time?
Sure. I mean, both on the domestic terrorism side and the international terrorism side with the homegrown violent extremist threat, I've seen an evolving threat with more self-insular actors, lone actors that we've seen self-radicalized online, seeing them mobilize by themselves on the internet and radicalize by themselves on the internet and mobilize to violence in shorter periods of time than we've seen in the past. I've been in this since 9/11, literally, that day, and you have, in the U.S., our threat, both on the domestic terrorism side and international terrorism side, is a lone actor. What you saw after 9/11 of who we arrested here in the United States, different conspiracies that you saw, we're seeing less and less of those type conspiracies, larger groups, 5 to 7, and more single actors. So of those 100, approximately 115 arrests on the domestic terrorism side, most of them are not conspiratorial. Those are single defendant subjects, and the same thing on the international terrorism side. So right there, an evolving threat. It's the internet. It's the internet. It's your ability to communicate with someone anywhere in the world and find a justification, whatever that justification is, whatever that ideology is, it's almost irrelevant, to justify the violence you want to commit.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. The chair